Chapter 3. Footing the Bill. It had taken an hour, but Leo finally found time to sneak away for a neck roll. Leaving the chief's expert Naira in Tolson's capable hands, Leo had exited the building under pretense of asking a few more questions of the witnesses. No sooner had he exited the building than he stepped aside to an outdoor smoking zone. Loading his lighter with a firearm battery no larger than a tooth, he depressed the thumb switch, creating a candle's worth of flame. His hand was shaking so bad at this point, he almost didn't get the neckel stick lit before the battery ran out and the flame died. He brought it to his lips and pulled. The numbness that followed was a comforting one, like a mother's embrace during a holiday visit. His lungs tingled in the way Neckrol always did. Was it bad for him? Absolutely. But it was the only consistent answer to stress he could find. He shook his head with a wry smile. Of course Melissa had been told to work this case. Could have been worse. She could have shown up with some new boyfriend and used him to showcase Leo's own inadequacies. He shook his head. That wasn't Melissa's style. Yes, she hated his guts, and probably for good reason. But she was a professional through and through. If she was going to ram something through his heart, she'd at least have the courtesy to file all the paperwork ahead of time. He took another pull, letting the numbing fog suppress his anxiety. In Neckrol's arms, he didn't have to worry about bills, or family, or hurting people. He had a history of hurting people. Neckrol could forgive him when no one else should. With the anxiety being actively smothered, he could finally think about the case. The alchemy expert was no junkie, nor was she really missing any marbles. She'd been sharp, examining each room in turn and confirming the earlier theorizing between Detective McKinley and Tolson. The crystals left behind had been homemade either by or for the killer. In fact, she'd explained how simple the process was. All you really needed was a mold, a saline solution, and whatever other ingredients your crystal of choice called for. That, and a lot of time. In school, Leo had done similar experiments to show how they used to do it. That had resulted in a classroom full of boys making aurum crystals so they could break them slowly and laugh at the fart noises, or aquam crystals to get each other wet. He couldn't remember what the girls had done. He'd been too young to care about girls at that stage of his education. Nowadays, crystals were made in factories, mass-produced with specific applications in mind. Fitted with standardized battery casing so you wouldn't mix any crystals up. Alchemy was becoming a lost art. People made it so that others could use it. The native alchemist had insisted that alchemy was losing the elements that made it such a personal art. Not native, Leo had to remind himself. Just because she's a Nulf doesn't make her a junkie. Says the guy smoking Neckrol. The teacher had offered a few other insights. Tolson had hung on her every word, probably planning to go home and try some of it for himself. Leo had been able to catch most of it. The paper used to wrap the crystals was a common one, used by medics for preparing curum crystals. It was cheap, the same kind of paper often used in baking to keep things from sticking to cooking sheets. She'd confirmed that the crystals involved were a simple saline base, but seemed impressed at the materials used to invoke specific elements. Apparently, the killer had worked with higher grade, more expensive materials. Those, at least, might provide a lead, since Naira said she could fully identify the materials given enough time. Leo thought back to the rooms he'd seen. He tried to picture someone slender, breaking through a window like it was paper, casting bolts of lightning to strike down any guards in his way, immolating a couch like it had been soaked in kerosene beforehand, creating explosions out of nothing but wind that was strong enough to send a man and his desk out a window to meet their untimely demise. He tried to imagine being that person. It certainly seemed like an impressive display of power, and yet there'd only been one casualty. Even the men who'd been exploded were coming away from it with only minor hearing loss and bruising. But why not just kill them? If you'd knocked them down, wouldn't it bring the greatest peace of mind to just kill them and know for sure that they wouldn't follow you? If he commanded the power of the elements, would he leave witnesses during an assassination? He had to admit that he wouldn't. So why, then? There seemed to be only two possible options. Either this person was incredibly powerful and just decided not to kill anyone but Lortran, or they wanted to appear incredibly powerful and used a series of alchemical tricks and gadgets to pull this all off. He knew which theory Tolson would go for, so he had to pick the latter. This had to be someone trying to make it look like they were stronger than they were. After all, the guards who had been in Lortran's room when the killer arrived said that she tried to hit them with lightning. Instead, it had hit the floor. It wasn't even close to connecting. Malfunctioning tech? It seemed likely. The front doors of the tower opened, and Leo saw Tolson and the Nulf walk out together. He pulled on what remained of the necrol stick until all of its violet glow had faded. He coughed a bit, adjusting to the new level of numbness in his lungs. Tossing the spent stick in a nearby trash can, he popped a breath mint from the tin he carried on the opposite side of his jacket and ran over to join them. Tolson raised an eyebrow as he approached. He didn't need to see the stick to know what Leo had been doing. His friend said nothing, instead asking Naira a question. "And what's the typical age for one of your students?" She responded quickly, her light accent punctuated by excitement. At least she'd finally relaxed a bit. "Oh, there's not really an age limit. You can start as young or as old as you like. I've worked with little children before, as well as older folks who wanted to learn to make Kurum crystals to treat arthritis, back pain, minor..." She cut off, turning toward Leo with a quick double sniff. "Necrol?" she asked, eyes full of something that looked like concern. "Oh, Fanina," Leo muttered. His friends already judged him for hanging on to the habit. He didn't need to add a stranger to that experience. "It's bad for me, I know." She nodded. "It is bad for you. Accumulate too much in the lungs, and it will liquefy your alveoli. Will fill your lungs with blood." Leo finished for her. "I know. I lost an uncle to necrol lung, all right? I'm working on quitting, but sometimes I need something that just listens for once and doesn't make demands on how I run my life." The alchemist flinched back like she'd been slapped across the snout. Tolson was biting his lower lip. Leo took a deep breath, then let it out in a long sigh. "I'm sorry, Miss Naira. I appreciate your concern. Thank you for coming out today, and I look forward to reading a report of your findings. Please give the chief my regards. I'll be sure to provide him with a good review of your work today." Tolson's hand came up to his mouth, and Leo could hear the laugh his coworker was failing to stifle. For her part, Naira just looked confused. "What?" Leo demanded. Naira cleared her throat, adjusting her grip on the strap of her bag. "I was told to be a resource to you until you find the person responsible for these murders. Though he said you might ask me to leave before then. I would respect your wishes, so if my help is no longer required..." Tolson stepped forward before Leo could answer. Lifting a finger with one hand, he gripped Leo's arm with the other. "Might I have a moment to confer with my detective associate?" Still looking confused, Naira nodded. Tolson gave a quick "thank you" before tugging Leo aside. "Confer with your detective associate?" Leo hissed. "What? She's smart, and she sounds cool, so I'm trying to learn a few more words for my vocabulary." "From a nat..." Leo cut himself off when the alchemist's ears twitched, then lowered his voice before continuing. "Are you on her side because you think she's actually going to help us with this, or because you're hoping she's going to teach you alchemy?" "Yes!" The response came out even before Leo finished asking his question. Leo sighed. "You realize I outrank you in this investigation, right?" "Oh, for sure, dude." "And therefore have total control over who to hire or consult?" "Chief did send her." Leo clenched his fists. "Yes, the chief sent her. Plus," Tolson added as his signature grin returned, "I already invited her to come to Benji's diner with us." "Because you're not buying lunch." "Because I'm not buying lunch," Tolson confirmed. He smacked his gut through his uniform, which means I'm eating good today. "Tolson, you eat good every day." Tolson shrugged. "Never do anything halfway, you know?" "Fine, fine. I'm too hungry to argue." "Great! I'll go save our table." Before Leo could protest, Tolson was jogging away. Tolson hadn't even jogged when he ran the obstacle course that was part of the precinct's yearly physical. What had gotten into that man? Leo reached up to rub at his eyes. When he turned, he found Naira, the alchemist teacher, standing there expectantly. You know where Benji's diner is? She frowned in thought before shaking her head. Corner of 8th and Peony, in the northwest quadrant, District 2? She nodded slowly. Yes, I believe I know where that is. Reaching into her bag, she pulled out a small notepad and scribbled the address down. See you there, then? Naira nodded again and gave a small bow. Thank you for your time. Sure. Leo nodded awkwardly, then left her standing there and walked towards his own vehicle. Something made him check over his shoulder, and he saw her staring at the place where Lortrin's body had fallen. They'd cleaned up the body, but the bloodstains still remained. She stared at it, contemplative. Then she noticed him watching her. She gave a polite smile, another small bow, turned, and walked away. Well, that was weird, he thought. He reached his car a few minutes later. Climbing inside, he buckled himself in, started the firearm engine, and turned up the radio. Thrusters propelled him backwards as an electric guitar solo carried on in the background. His car pivoted in place, suspended above the street by the electromagnets beneath. Then he launched himself forward. He made it to the end of the block when he spotted her again. Slowing his car, he pulled up at a bus stop where Naira sat waiting. She glanced up at him when he stopped, cocked her head, and waved with a small smile. Rolling down his window, Leo leaned an arm out and asked, You are coming, right? To the diner? She nodded and checked a wristwatch hidden under her left sleeve. The bus should be here shortly. Okay. See you there, then. She nodded, but the action was more like a bow. Thank you for your time. There it was again. Maybe the politeness was an academic thing? He didn't remember any professors acting like that when he went to academy. But he also hadn't been a science major. With a wave, he rolled up his window and pulled away. He made it an entire block before turning around. His finger drummed as he pulled up to the bus stop once again. This time he had to roll down the passenger window. Would you like a ride? Less time waiting out in the sun. I do not mind waiting. The sun is quite pleasant. She was probably a morning person. Leo checked the clock on his car's dash. It read 10:41. 41 minutes past midday. It was too late in the day for him to continue to be grumpy. Still, I feel bad leaving you out here. Can I give you a ride? Would it make you feel better, sir? Leo wanted to grip his face in frustration. He was just trying to be nice. Why couldn't she just... He cut the thought off, letting it leave him with a sigh. He nodded several times. Yes, it would make me feel better. She nodded with that polite half-bow. Very well. Then she stood with the prominent, straight-backed pose of a politician. Yeah, she wasn't like any Nulf he'd met before. Of course he'd get the odd one. Leaning over the seat, he yanked at the handle to open the door for her. It only opens from the inside, so you'll have to tug it when I unlatch it. She cocked her head, but followed his instructions without comment or question. Only after she was already partly inside did he remember the pile of receipts stuffed in the crack of his passenger chair. When had it become a pile? He swiped as many as he dared, tossing them over his shoulder into the back seat. She slid in, her knees halfway to her chest, and closed the door. There's a lever under your seat, he gestured towards it, so you don't have to ride with your knees under your chin. She felt underneath and found the lever. Pulling it, she immediately slid backwards, far more than she intended. Sorry, she said, scooting it back forward to a more reasonable position. First time in a car? Leo teased. In the front seat, yes. She said it so calmly that Leo was caught off guard. So off guard that he blurted the next question. What about driving? She turned to him with that quizzical tilt of her head she seemed to like. The feather in her hair brushed her shoulder as she did so. Her words were slow in coming, as if the answer to his question was so obvious She feared it was a trick question. I am afraid I do not have a license. Right. Another thing he should have remembered about Nolfs, but was too insensitive to think of in the moment. Maybe he was still a jerk. He pulled back into the street, suddenly dreading the awkwardness of the coming drive. 20 minutes, and about as many words later, Leo pulled up to Benji's diner. Naira shouldered her bag as she exited, then took a moment to stare at the restaurant. Whatever she'd been expecting probably wasn't this. Personally, Leo thought the weirdly curved windows and use of color palettes that were 40 years out of fashion were part of this place's charm. That, and it wasn't one of Renegold's chains. There wasn't another restaurant in the bulb, or likely any other bulb like Benji's. Was that overselling it? No. Nostalgia was a powerful factor, yes, and Benji's had been around when Leo's parents met each other, so he had some history with the place. But no matter the current economic status of Cyphus, you could always count on Benji's being open. Plus, they never opened until after 9, and stayed open until 1 in the morning, both of which Leo found to be sensible business decisions. They passed Tolson's police cruiser as they approached the front. Leo got the door for her, and was immediately greeted by the smell of eggs, coffee, and... red spuds? Oh, right. Yesterday was storm day, so that meant today was the first of 3 Sundays. Time was a blur these days. Naira stood there in the open doorway with an odd expression. She raised her nose a bit, taking in the diner's scents for herself. At least she wasn't scowling, like the last girl he'd brought to Benji's. She'd read the entire menu only to ask if they had salads. It had been one of the most embarrassing moments of Leo's short adult life. Naira, by comparison, looked to be growing excited. Yes, he recognized that twinkle of the eye. You think it smells great? He asked. Wait until you taste it. This seemed to bring her back to the moment, and she stepped inside. They found Tolson in the corner, his back to the window that ran the length of the front of the diner. He waved them over, and Leo took his signature spot across from him. Leo's spot had a solid wall beside him, keeping him out of the sun, which danced yellow across the ends of Tolson's white fur. This way, they both were comfy. Sun or shade? Tolson asked, gesturing first to the seat beside him, then to the one beside Leo. Oh, sun, most definitely. Tolson grinned, patting the seat beside him. Then he turned to Leo. Didn't I tell you she was smart? The circus is built from clowns, Tolson. Naira glanced between them, setting her bag on the floor by her feet. Tolson wrinkled his nose dramatically, showing a hint of fangs. Gross. No wonder circuses are illegal. Then he handed Naira a menu, which she inspected. Leo sighed, taking a sip of the coffee Tolson had already ordered for him. They're illegal because Redenmeyer monopolized the industry, then overworked his performers and mistreated his animals. Naira glanced up at the name, but Tolson was the one who spoke. And he made that big tent from clowns? No wonder the walls were so stripy. Leo stared at his friend for a few long moments. Tolson, have I ever told you that you're an idiot? Tolson finished. Yeah, but I'm not smart enough to pick up on that. Keep telling me, though. I'm sure it'll sink in someday. Both men held straight faces as long as they could, but Leo broke first. Shaking his head, he grinned and took another sip of coffee. Ah, see? Tolson elbowed Naira with surprising gentleness for his size, then gestured at Leo. Watching the first crack of a smile on Leo's face is as notable as watching the first rays of sunrise. Once you see Leo's first smile of the day, you know the day's actually gotten started. With a slow nod, she turned back to Leo. I see. That does explain the stiff lip during the drive. Though I thought I smelled a bit of panic. Tolson snickered at this. You guys rode together? Leo sighed. She was gonna wait for the bus, Tolson. What, I'm just gonna leave her there? You are the picture of a modern gentleman, Leo. Tolson's reply earned an eye roll from Leo. But nah, he was probably just nervous because the last girl he had in his car tried to steal it. She did? Leo and Naira asked in unison. Yeah, remember? Cute girl, 5 foot and change, purple dress, borrowed heels. The girl I arrested for being drunk and disorderly? Tolson nodded with a grin. She tried to start a fight with a red crest in somebody's lawn at 2 in the morning. Naira turned back to Leo. And she tried to steal your car? He sighed, stretching back in his seat. The operative word is tried. Don't know if you noticed, but the little divider between my front seat and back seat doesn't work really well. You can lift it, but the part that holds it in place is broken, so you can lower it pretty easily if you pull in the right spot. She figured that out on accident and pulled the lever to disengage my electron repulsors. Dinged them up pretty good, so they still fritz out sometimes. I've been meaning to replace them, but that takes time and money. Noticing her look of confusion, he trailed off. Sorry, that's more than you asked for. Tolson nudged him under the table, and for a moment he thought it had to do with the conversation. Then Tolson wagged his eyebrows and tilted his head in a way that suggested he wanted Leo to turn around. Leo glanced over his shoulder to see a waitress approaching. She was on the shorter side, dressed in dingy blue. Her hair was done up in a side bun with a flower pinned through it. Leo's mind wandered to cinnamon rolls when he saw it, and he knew he was still too hungry to function as a proper adult. How y'all doing today? My name's Noelle, and I'll be taking care of you today. Tolson nudged Leo under the table again. Leo kicked him back. The new waitress had a Dakota accent. She was probably from a different bulb. Are we all ready to order? They placed their order. Leo and Tolson got their usual meals, but Tolson added on an extra side and a dessert, something he was more likely to do when he wasn't paying. For her part, Naira ordered a small sandwich and a bowl of soup. Leo hadn't even realized you could get sandwiches here. It didn't escape his notice that this was about the cheapest thing she could have chosen off the menu, something his wallet would be thankful for. After their waitress, Noelle, left, Tolson leaned across the table. Dude, she's cute! Leo disguised his sigh by blowing into his coffee. Okay, sure. So? So, it's been a few years since Melissa and that whole thing. You could ask her out. She's new. I can't do that to her. That accent? She's from another bulb. Working here on a Benji salary? I guess she's a student. Someone you know? Tolson turned to Naira, who looked startled to be included in this discussion. She shook her head. Sorry, no. She's not one of my students. I don't have many Snapper students. Tolson's eyes widened, and he looked a bit like he'd accidentally inhaled part of the soda he was nursing. You're not opposed to Snappered students, are you? Not particularly. I teach those who wish to learn. Oh, right. Cool. Cool. Tolson took a long, suspect sip of his soda. The conversation lulled then, as Tolson reached the bottom of his glass and started sucking air. No, Leo didn't want the distraction of a girl right now. More than that, he really didn't want to hurt someone again. Naira broke the silence hesitantly. You mentioned earlier someone named Redenmeyer? Should I know this name? How naturally the topic shifted back to work. Leo sighed, readjusting in his chair to stop pinching his tail. Maybe. Orwin Redenmeyer, the guy who made all his money with questionable circus acts. Brought in a lot of wildlife from outside the bulbs, treated them poorly, well, cheaply, I guess. There were a couple incidents where some of the animals hurt circus employees, and a couple involving some of the circus goers. Led to some lawsuits, but Orwin had enough money to be one of the 13, so his lawyers got him off easily. Not a problem anymore, though. He's an ex-13. Tolson ran a thumb across his throat. Second case with the 13? Third, Leo corrected. 3 months back, someone froze him in his own pool. Naira shuddered, shifting in her seat. I think I remember hearing about that. And the 13? Leo raised an eyebrow, but Tolson looked like he'd just been asked if the bulb was the only thing keeping every Cyphus citizen from asphyxiating on the planet's toxic fumes. It should be common knowledge, and yet... You don't know the 13? Naira shook her head. Only as a passing term. I've heard them mentioned, and I know they're pretty influential in Cyphus, but I don't know who they are. Leo finished the last of his coffee. Well, there's normal people like us who make enough money to get by. We might be able to afford a place to live, some personal transit, some food, but that's about it. Then there's the people who have enough money that they could buy their own bulb. If you work anywhere in Cyphus, you can follow where the money comes from, and you probably work for one of the 13. Been around forever, and normally I'd say that would never change, but now 6 of them have been killed in a full seasonal cycle? He took a moment to count in his head. Yeah, it has been that long. Naira nodded, eyes thoughtful. The man killed last night? He was one of them? Lordran DuPaul? Tolson cut in. Yeah, he was the 6th one to get offed. Offed? Naira gave her neighbor her little head tilt, repeating the word with her own unique accent. Offed, killed, murdered, all different words for the same thing, Tolson explained with a shrug. But why? She asked, turning back to Leo. Why was he killed? Now it was Leo's turn to shrug. That's what they want us to figure out. I'm sure someone stands to gain from him being killed, whether that's an insurance policy, or access to his funds, or a will, or something. Money's probably involved. He had plenty to go around. If people are willing to shoot each other just to steal a car worth 2,000 Christum, how much more might someone be willing to do to someone worth billions of Christum? Is that why the others were killed? For money? Leo shook his head. Not really sure. Some of them, maybe. Stealing from even one of them should set someone up for life, so that seems an unlikely motivator, considering that 6 of them are dead. For a while, Tolson added, we thought it might be a copycat type of thing. Someone was brazen enough to off 113, and then one by one, more of them started dying. So if one person could do it, maybe that inspired others to do it. But witness accounts from each attack make it seem like it's all been the same person each time. And what kind of person would that be? Someone like you, it seems. Leo used a finger to play with his empty coffee mug. All the witnesses' reports indicate a female Nolf who supposedly has found a way to weaponize alchemy. In his chair, Tolson pumped his fist. I really should have ordered a second dessert. Yes, Tolson, you were right. Calm down, I'm only buying your first dessert. That's all you have? Naira asked, with raised eyebrow. Female Nolf? There's over 100,000 Nolfs in Cyphus, and if roughly half are female, that's still quite a lot. If they're competent with alchemy, that narrows it down somewhat, but even workers in the battery factories have to learn basic alchemy. It can be very dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. Leo snorted. Yeah, I really don't want to interview that many people. Tolson's chair squeaked as the larger Sneppard turned to face Naira. I imagine that's why the chief asked for you, to trace this alchemist's magical signature for us. What? The feather in Naira's hair nearly touched the table with the head tilt she gave Tolson. That's not a thing. Tolson's face fell faster than Leo's bank account would after this meal. It's not? But isn't that just how they track criminals in the stories? Yeah, that's just fiction, Tolson, Leo said. Sorry, bud. Tolson's thumb drew sad circles on the checkered tablecloth. I know it's fiction, but I thought writers were supposed to research stuff to make it more believable. Leo shook his head. Nah, they need it to be exciting to get it to sell. Reality isn't always exciting. Noel returned with Table 14's food. This brought a wide smile to the larger officer's face, especially the slice of pie that sagged under a scoop of ice cream the size of her fist. His partner across the table snorted. You realize it's going to melt before you finish your burger, right? The larger officer grinned, grabbing his fork and knife with clenched fists like a toddler. Challenge accepted. The Benji cheese melt, Noel announced as she set it down in front of the much skinnier officer. With applesauce and extra fries. He nodded, sitting up straight in his chair. His knife scraped on the plate as he made sure none of his food was touching. Fitting, He had ordered off the kids' menu after all. And soup and sub for the lady. As she set them down in front of the Nulf, Noelle could read the trepidation in her eyes. She was dressed rather professionally, but Cyphus's immigration policies meant there was no way the woman was another snop. By definition, she couldn't be. At least Noelle's probationary citizenship would graduate into full citizenship at the end of the year. But being a steppard meant a lot more in this bulb than back in Decodal. Citizenship in Cyphus worked differently for Nulfs. Maybe one day Noelle would be able to change that. Noelle's ears twitched as the Nulfin woman's stomach growled. Neither officer caught it, as the larger one was currently trying to swipe several fries from his partner's plate. Noelle leaned in a bit, one hand on her knee, the other hand brushing some of her own stray hair back behind her ear. "Are you sure that's all you wanted to eat, hon?" The Nulf looked up to meet her gaze, then nodded. "This is sufficient." Noelle returned the nod. "All right, but flag me down if you change your mind, you hear?" Straightening up, she brought her hands to rest on her skirt-covered hips. "Anything else I can grab for y'all?" The skinnier officer spoke up, asking for fry sauce, though he didn't look her way. The other two said they were fine, so Noelle headed back to the kitchen. Pushing through the swinging double doors with her shoulder, she almost ran into Jen, who was trying very hard to balance an entire order for the party of 7 she was handling. "Oh, pardon me, Jen." The door stopped inches from Jen's nose as Noelle held it open and got out of the older waitress's way. Thankfully, the next few words from Jen were too low for the cook to hear, but they weren't directed at him anyway. Noelle flinched back, as if Jen had physically hit her with the insult. She shook her head as she watched Jen pass and continue out to her table. Honestly, people in Cyphus had no imagination. Everyone used the same cotton-picking word regardless of situation. Proper insults required flair. You had to know your target, then tailor it to them. The best insults were the ones you could slide under the skin. The ones that would sink in hours later, make all their fur stand on end, and leave them huffy the next day. She'd have to think of a new one to slip Jen before end of shift. Tucking her tail, she squeezed past where Benji's grandson Rigel was scrubbing dishes. His normally gray hands were covered in suds that soaked the fur up to his elbows, and he scooted to the side as she passed. Reaching the shelves where they kept the major condiments, she scanned them quickly, but didn't see anything labeled fry sauce. "Mahandro, table 14 wants fry sauce. Do we keep that refrigerated or something?" Beside her, Rigel shook his head. He dripped suds on the counter as he pointed at 2 different bottles. "It's a mixture of ketchup and mayo." An omelet sizzled behind her as Mahandro flipped it. The chef then added, "Equal parts of both. I like to add in a pinch of garlic and a pinch of paprika, too. If it were Benji, he'd add 3 pinches of each, but you lose the other flavors when you do that." Noelle followed their instructions, preparing a small paper cup of the stuff. With as many shifts as she'd shared with Jen recently, these two made working here worth it. "Little miss, I've worked here 20 years and developed crippling entitlement issues. Made a lot of people quit." Noelle would quit on her own terms, not when Jen decided. One bad apple could spoil the basket, but only if the other apples touched it. So Noelle would just follow the other apple's example and cling to the basket's sides. For now, at least. Scooting past Rigel with fry sauce in hand, she called back to Mahandro. "That omelet sufficiently burned for table 9 yet?" The chef snorted, reaching for several small seasoning jars. "You're right, I forgot. Catching one on fire last week was so enlightening, I really should start doing all of them that way." "I'll just say the word and I'll put it out," Rigel added from the sink, gripping the nozzle and pointing it towards the chef. "Steamed omelet, now that's an idea." Noelle grinned, pushing the doors open with a rump and stepping back into the diner's lobby. The omelet-burning jab had been the wholesome kind of insult, the one you knew would rile a person up, but good-natured like. Not Jen. Jen would have just called the chef a native and stormed out complaining about how every problem at Benji's was anyone's fault but her own. Noelle knew this from experience. Again, Jen was ruder than a splash of cold water during a hot shower and had all the imagination of a dairy cow. She was certainly spotted like one. Noelle was going to have to let the cow comparison stew for a bit. Calling Jen a cow would be funny, because the woman would immediately be upset at the implication of being called fat. Problem was, if it was obvious enough for Jen to understand in the moment, it was a poor insult. Yeah, Noelle still needed to workshop it. Bits of Table 14's conversation drifted her way as she approached. You should have seen her, Leo, the larger officer was saying around mouthfuls of food. She was dropping bits of fur into vials, and they'd turn different colors. And she was whispering stuff while she did it, like a TV witch. The Nolfin woman tilted her head at the comparison to a witch. We use different colors to denote what stage of the process the reaction is at. It's a little like a litmus test, but a very specific one. The fur and skin tissue will stay in the solution for maybe 2 or 3 days before dissolving. After that, we can compare it to other samples that have been recovered before. If we combine the samples and the solution turns green, they're from the same person. If it turns violet, they're from different people. The skinnier officer, the one who had been called Leo, nodded thoughtfully. He hadn't touched anything on his plate since Noelle left, though it had been neatly divided into thirds. I've heard about one of the other bulbs trying that. I think they were able to use it to catch a cold case serial killer. Judge considered it sufficient evidence. I haven't heard of anyone using it here in Cyphus yet, though. They call it genetic something or other. Alchemical genetic matching, the Nolf said, before taking a spoonful of her soup. Noelle walked up to the table, holding out the paper cup. Here's that fry sauce for you, sir. Leo glanced at her, then the cup, then made a spot on the table for her to set it down. He then deliberately and awkwardly stared out the window. Thank you. With a sigh, Noelle set the cup of sauce down. Anything else I can get for you folks? The other two at the table both looked at her with full mouths. The larger man gave an enthusiastic thumbs up as he swallowed. Well, if y'all need anything, just flag me down, okay? Then she raised an eyebrow at the Nolf. And I do mean anything, hon. The woman swallowed what was in her mouth. Clearing her throat, she gave a small nod, like Noelle's old pharmacist used to. Understood. Thank you for your time. I like how you've done your hair, Noelle told her. Feather's a nice touch. Red's a good color on you. The woman blinked, tilting her head to regard Noelle. Then her hand reached up, brushing the feather with several fingertips. Thank you. Noelle didn't bother to stop the smile that came to her face. People in Cyphus really should compliment each other more often. This woman clearly wasn't used to it. A warm nostalgia accompanied Noelle as she left to check on another table, but her ears twitched at the conversation behind her. Leo, did you ignore her because I said she was cute? Noelle stopped where she was, ears rotating of their own accord. I wasn't ignoring her. The howl of laughter that followed caused a number of nearby ears to turn, though Noelle was the only one who glanced back in that direction. I wasn't, Leo insisted with a hiss. He was leaning on the table and glanced her way. No sooner had they made eye contact when he immediately diverted his gaze again. He turned his face to the window and muttered something Noelle couldn't hear. Whatever he said, the larger officer grinned. Then he stole several more fries before turning to give her a thumbs up. Noelle smirked. According to Mahandro, these two were regulars. He'd recognize the orders right away. If that was the case, she could have a lot of fun with them. 10 minutes later, Officer Gray's chair creaked as he leaned back. Stacking all three of his empty plates, he patted his stomach with a contented sigh. Ah, thanks for that, Leo. The detective snorted. I'd feel guilty if I let you go hungry. Naira stared at the plates in amazement. He'd even licked them clean, something she was pretty sure you weren't supposed to do in professional settings. Despite that, his partner hadn't even batted an eye. For her part, Naira had finished her soup and half her sandwich. Would they think it rude if she took it home instead of eating it on the spot? Was that really her primary concern right now? Someone like you, he'd said. Sitting across from her like this, he seemed to have difficulty keeping eye contact with her. It was like he didn't want to get caught staring. Why should that bother him? Everyone else in this diner had stared at her from the moment she stepped inside. She was painfully aware of her status as the only Nolf in a room full of Sneppards. That didn't seem to faze the jovial man beside her, but that just seemed to be who he was. He talked with her more freely than almost anyone she'd ever met. By contrast, Detective Parsons treated her with the aloofness and suspicion she expected. Was it bad that that felt more normal to her? When he'd pulled up to the bus stop to offer her a ride, she'd thought for sure he'd recognized her. But the longer this charade went on, the more she believed Officer Leo Parsons had truly forgotten her. She wasn't sure if that should anger or relieve her. Coming to a decision, she carefully wrapped her sandwich in a paper napkin. The detective eyed it, then glanced up at her. "You get enough to eat?" She nodded. "Yes, sir. Thank you for your generosity." She was in the lion's den in more ways than one here. It was worth overdoing her own politeness. He shrugged, taking another bite of his own food. "Next time I make a bet with Tolson, I'm feeding you instead of him." Next time. The words tugged a question free from her subconscious, and she couldn't ignore it. "Sirs, how long do you think this investigation will take?" Detective Parsons shrugged again. "Depends on how long it takes to unearth something concrete, I guess." "Leo's got a good track record. He's..." Ow! Officer Gray bumped the table as his partner kicked his leg. "I mean it, Leo. The last investigation was a fluke, and I'm not trying to bring that up. But for 95% of his cases, Leo gets his guy within a month or two of getting put on the case. With one exception, he's always caught his perp." Naira turned back to him, confused at the term. "Perp? Oh, perpetrator. You know, the bad guy." She nodded in understanding. She knew a fair bit of lingo and snep, but most of it was academic. Detective Parsons finished the last bit of food on his plate, though he did not lick it as his partner had. "You said Chief hired you for the duration of the case?" Naira grimaced, then caught herself and forced a smile. She still had the letter from the university headmaster explaining that she'd been assigned to this duty. She was still expected to teach her classes, but 2 of the 4 had been handed off to substitute professors. It had taken her much effort to get permission to teach those classes, and having them forcibly taken away so easily did not settle her stomach about getting them back when this was all over. "My understanding is that he asked the school for an expert in alchemy, and is reimbursing the school for my time." "You in a hurry to get back?" Detective Leo's whiskers twitched as he wiped his mouth with a napkin. "We are in the last month of planting season. Many of my students are working on final projects and preparing for final exams. I do not wish to leave them without me as a resource any longer than is necessary." "So you like your work?" She nodded. "It has always been my dream to teach." "And how much are your alchemy classes?" Officer Gray leaned on the table, which notably sagged towards him. "That depends on how you take them. If you go through the university, you have to pay normal tuition, and that is several thousand crystum per semester, though I think tuition is halved for Cyphus citizens." She caught the pair sharing a glance, noting that her implication wasn't lost on them. The same discount wasn't offered to rescues. Officer Gray's lip sagged in disappointment. "I wonder if I could talk the chief into getting a scholarship for me through the department." The detective nearly snorted into his 4th cup of coffee. That might explain why she felt him bouncing his leg under the table. "Don't think the chief would spring for that," he noted. "We haven't needed an alchemist on the force before. Don't see him looking to add one now. Well, at least as anything other than a consultant." Naira offered a polite smile as he gestured at her. She glanced at the officer beside her. His genuine disappointment tugged at something in her, and she almost told him about the private classes she taught from home. Distrust held her tongue. Those classes were a direct violation of her contract with the university, and if they were made publicly known, she'd likely be fired, so she said nothing further. After Detective Parsons paid the bill, they all got up from their table and made their way to leave. In passing the kitchen, Naira once again caught the scent of another Nulf. She scanned the crowd of people dining again, but it was a sea of whites and grays. She must be picking up on someone in the back, out of sight, where they wouldn't draw attention the way Naira did as she followed the 2 policemen out of the diner. Outside, Officer Gray bid them farewell, driving away in his own vehicle. Detective Parsons leaned against the driver's door of his car, while Naira waited for him to open the door on her side as he had before. Instead, he kept leaning before asking, "Where you headed next?" Her mind immediately jumped to her catalyst preparation trays. After last night, she'd needed to start quite a few crystallizing. "My lab," she told him, "at the university." "And how do you normally get there?" "By walking, or with the bus pass the university provides." He nodded, tapping his finger against the roof of his car. "Want a lift?" Truthfully, she didn't. Being driven around by a police officer of all people was stressful enough, even if she was getting to ride in the front seat this time, to say nothing of the specific officer Anima had seen fit to cross her path with once more. Unfortunately, her continued employment depended on her not giving Cyphus police a reason to complain to the university. Unsurprisingly, the longer she spent around this detective, the more her thoughts wandered back to her son. She sifted through memories, remembering a time when her dear little boy tried to bring a frog in the house, and the absolute chaos that had ensued when it had escaped. This let a smile come to her face naturally, as she responded with a gratitude she still couldn't feel for this man. "If it's not too much trouble, a lift would be most helpful." Chapter 4. A Minor Breakdown. Leo's finger tapped the rhythm in his head against his steering wheel. This car ride was proving just as exciting as the first one. It wasn't the native's fault. Naira was a pleasant conversationalist. She also slowed her words when she spoke to tone down her Nolf accent. Perhaps a practice from working at the university. The sight of him, trained by his mother, said that he should be treating Naira as an honored guest, that he should be asking her questions about her and her life. The sight of him, trained at police academy, said that he should be taking this opportunity to ask questions about the case. Maybe there was a way to do both. "So, have you worked crime scenes before?" The silence that followed was deafening. So much so, Leo could hear the slight output adjustments to his car's firum thrusters as he turned a corner. They made it almost a full block before his passenger finally responded. "I'm trying to decide if this is another colloquialism of Snap, like Officer Gray is fond of. Worked crime scenes? What exactly are you asking me?" "Have you studied one before? Or seen one? Looked for evidence? Have you even worked with the police before?" Naira gave a slow nod, her face registering understanding. "I have, once before. But I was a child then. That was some 30 years ago." 30 years? Curiosity was any Snepard's downfall, especially one in Leo's line of work. His next question came out with no regard to any life experience he had picked up from women. "How old are you?" Naira's gaze traveled out the window. After a moment of thought, "As best I know, I turned 44 at the end of last harvest season." Leo looked at her again. If he'd been asked to estimate her age, he'd have guessed early 30s. 44 made her a few years younger than his mother, and Naira looked considerably healthier. Leo's mother was a special case, though. Regardless, he hadn't studied Nolfin physical features since Academy. Ever since that awful snow season a few years back, he'd gone face-blind to natives. He'd misread that time, acted on a misjudgment. He didn't want to do that again. He couldn't do that again. Man, he really did have mothers on the brain. "Did you mean to pass University Boulevard?" Naira's question collided with Leo's thoughts like a car crash. He shook his head, growling under his breath at distracting himself. "No, sorry, I'll turn around." At the next intersection, he caught the traffic signal already transitioning. The car leaned with the momentum as the thrusters whipped the vehicle into a U-turn. The hum of the electrum repulsors grew under the strain of keeping the car level. Then, with a horrible popping sound, the passenger side gave out. Naira's head hit the roof as the car fell into a slant. Her side of the car scraped against the street as Leo brought them to a complete stop. Working the lever at the center, he shut down the repulsors, lowering his side of the vehicle until it was also making contact with the street. He cursed himself for being in such a hurry to rid himself of his passenger. Now they were grounded on the side of the road and blocking a lane of traffic. Perfect. His claws dug into his steering wheel, and he had no doubt he was scowling as he turned to Naira. You okay? She rubbed at her head, then nodded. It may be a little bruised. Nothing serious. Good, that's good. He had to squeeze his eyes shut and focus on his breathing to drown out the calls of the necro sticks in his pocket. Do cars often do this? Leo let out a sigh. No, I'm just cheap. I never had it fixed, so this has been a long time in coming. One embarrassing payphone call later, and a tow truck was on its way. So we are just supposed to wait until they get here? Naira was polite as she asked, but it was pretty obvious from her tone that she didn't like the idea any more than Leo did. He shrugged. Unless you know how to fix cars. I certainly don't. Her hands were folded patiently in her lap, but the way her thumbs tapped together told a different story. I don't have experience with cars, she admitted. But do you know what went wrong? Yeah, the electrum repulsors on your side went out. I think I took the corner too fast and it overloaded something. If I put too much strain on that side, stuff freaks out and I have to replace the batteries. They're expensive though, and I used my last spare a month ago. Naira sniffed and gave a small nod. That explains the electrum smell. Raising an eyebrow at her, Leo asked, Electrum has a smell? Naira nodded again. The alchemical components don't really, but the reaction does. You can't smell it in a battery unless the battery's been compromised. Like I said, anytime this happens, I have to replace the battery. Someone honked as they passed, sticking their hand out the window with a rude gesture. Leo returned the gesture. Not like I want to be grounded here, he growled. Naira's thumb tapping crescendoed, then stopped. Can't we access the batteries, or are those underneath the car? Leo had to stop and think before answering the question. He knew basics, like the difference between the pellets that fueled his car and the pellets that were used to wash the windshield. The only reason he knew where the repulsor batteries were on his car was because he'd had to replace them before. We can get to them, actually. The one we want is on your side of the car, but that puts us on the same side as afternoon traffic. And again, I don't have a replacement on me. The last one cost me 300 crystum. That got the teacher's attention. Leo smirked. Replacing the whole system was going to cost me 4,000. I could almost get a new car for that, so I've been putting it off. That is a lot of money. Yeah. Her shock did not last long. Still, may I see the batteries in question? Leo watched the stream of passing traffic in his side mirror. He really didn't want to do this. The tow truck was already on its way. Unfortunately, even only viewed from the corner of his eye, the look she gave him was filling him with guilt. There probably wasn't any harm in looking. Besides, it wasn't like getting hit by a passing car could make his day any worse. With a sigh, he got out of the car. It took 3 attempts to get the panel open. The interior was coated in a faint blue slime that smelled a bit like the smoke from an electrical fire. Leo waved a hand in front of his face, as if that might help. Inside, the battery had blown out on one side, hence all the blue goop everywhere. He'd just replaced it a couple weeks ago, so there was a lot. Beside him, Naira crouched to look inside. Her eyes studied the mess, though there wasn't really much to look at. Just a bunch of wires, metal contacts, busted battery, and battery guts to cover it all. He left her to it, wandering away to smoke a necro stick. Leaning against the car, he felt the soothing numbness kick in, though it wasn't strong enough to beat back as much anxiety as the situation had unearthed. The entire car rocked, and for a second he thought someone had sideswiped them. But a glance to the side showed Naira, inspecting the dead battery she'd just wrenched free. The blue slime ran down her arm, causing much of the fur around it to stand on end. She held it up to the sunlight, studying it. Then she looked at him. Her eyes immediately darted to the necro stick between his lips. She said nothing, and returned to inspecting the battery. Frustration and shame bubbled inside Leo. Most people had the decency to openly judge him with words for his habit. Others would smoke beside him. Somehow the silence was worse. The growl, He inhaled twice more, then stamped out the stick a little early. Walking back around the car, he positioned himself between her and any oncoming traffic. Keeping the passing cars in his periphery, Leo watched as she wiped out the inside of the compartment with a white cloth rag. "Makes a mess, doesn't it?" he commented. Rather than her ears, her nose twitched in response to his words. What? Did he need to breathe away from her now, too? As before, she made no comment on it. Instead, she nodded. Alchemical reactions are often messy when interrupted. Though, as you can see, by spreading it out, much of it is evaporating. There was a bit of an odd, filmy residue being left behind as she wiped, like flecks of golden glitter. Leo gestured towards the compartment. "You do science. Any of this make sense to you?" She regarded him with raised eyebrow and her quirky little head tilt. "I do science. So I recognize a circuit when I see one, even if it's got a lot of additional branches coming off of it. You said this is your repulsor? Meaning this is what keeps the car off the ground?" Leo shrugged. "It's supposed to. Pushes off the metal in the street or whatever, so it doesn't work if you try to drive over someone's lawn. When it goes out, your car stops hovering. And the trade-off from reducing friction from something like wheels justifies the inefficient energy expenditure of microthrusters?" Leo shrugged. "I don't know half of those words. I just activate the lever to make the car float, then use the pedals to make it go and the wheel to steer." He pantomimed the actions with an appropriate whooshing noise. Naira sighed. "I get the feeling it's not about efficiency, so much as people buy it because it seems cool." "At the very least, it's convenient." "When it works." "When it works," Leo agreed. Naira continued wiping out the inside, then held up the battery for him to inspect. "See this cap on the end? It's designed to fail. If your reaction is going to explode, this gives you a chance to direct it away from anything vital. Lucky for us, the reaction was a slow burn with low-grade reactants, so it just gooped everything up, rather than electrifying your whole car and us with it." The more she talked about science, the more her natural accent surfaced. She raised an eyebrow, waving the battery case as if expecting a response. Leo realized he'd been paying attention to the sound of her words, when he should have been listening to the words themselves. Thankfully, he'd heard enough to form the safe layman's response. "That sounds bad." Naira sniffed, as if getting what she'd expected. "They shield these things so much. They're generally pretty safe. Makes them hard to modify, but since this one already blew open, I might be able to limp it along." "But all its insides are now its outsides. Did you scoop the goop back inside?" Naira gave him a look that made him feel like a schoolchild. "No, the reaction was diffused, and spreading out the surface area made everything evaporate. It's the safer cleanup path when you're unsure of the strength of the reactants involved. But if we start up a fresh reaction and seal it up again, we might be able to make a temporary battery." "You're the expert." The grimace on her face made it plain she disagreed, but she reached through the open window for her large bag anyway. Rooting around inside, she fished out a trio of thin batteries, each about the size and thickness of a fancy fountain pen. Gripping one in both hands, she tried to crack it like a glow stick. Nothing happened. She grunted and tried again. The metal case remained unyielding. She looked around for a moment, then reached inside to open the car door. Positioning the batteries inside the door frame, she turned to Leo. "Would you hold these in place? And watch your fingers." Warily, Leo stepped up and gripped both ends of the batteries. He curled his fingers back as if he was chopping something with a knife, trying to keep them as far away from the door as possible. "This isn't gonna damage my—" The slamming of the car door cut off his question of concern. Two of the batteries began to glow with a faint blue as Naira opened the door to check her work. "Swap them around so I can get the last one." Leo complied, and she slammed the door again. Now all three batteries were giving a faint glow, though their outer casing was crimped inwards. "Thank you," she said, dropping the batteries into the spent repulsor battery case one at a time. Leo opened the door for himself, scowling at the new dents within the frame where some of the paint had rubbed off. He sighed. turning back to see her using the roof of his car to push the metal battery cap back into a mostly closed position. Claws immediately bit into his palm pads, and keeping himself from saying anything was almost harder than having another necrol. He reminded himself that she was trying to help. Naira left a bit of a gap, which she used to fill the battery with some kind of solution from her bag. Once liquid began to pour out of the battery, she tried to finish wrenching the cap into place. She struggled to close it all the way, and wound up pounding the end into the part of the car's frame between the front and rear doors. Leo forced himself to watch her, rather than risk seeing what else she had done to his car. He breathed in through his nose and out through his mouth. Naira gave the battery cap one last smack for good measure, then held it up to inspect. Turning it this way and that, she smiled. "It's actually sealed." "Great, that's..." Leo allowed himself a look at the side of his car, regretting it immediately. "That's just great." Leaning back into the compartment, Naira reinstalled the battery. "Want to power it up? I'd do it slowly if you can. I'll keep an eye on it." "Yeah, sure, yeah." Leo shook his head and climbed back inside his car. As carefully as he could, he engaged the lever that activated the repulsors. To his surprise, they both responded. He had to make some adjustments with a small dial he'd never even touched since purchasing the car, but the car lifted off the ground and came very close to leveling out. Outside, Naira closed the access panel before dusting herself off, shaking out her formerly goopy arm, and joining him in the car once more. "So, I'm good to go?" Naira shrugged. "You might want to take it easy. If too much strain blew out your last one, this one's even more likely to blow. But if you are gentle with it, you should be fine." He nodded. Gentle. Yeah, that thing he was good at being. Starting up the firearm engine, he checked his dash to make sure that all his settings were still good. If he needed to be careful, then he didn't want to forget anything. Which was exactly when he saw the tow truck approaching in the rearview mirror. One awkward conversation, and a lot of apologizing later, Leo and Naira were on the road again. It took several blocks before Leo got up the courage to say, "Thanks." "You are most welcome." "Thought you said you haven't worked on cars before." Her fingers rested against the upper sill of the window, tapping against it as she turned to look at him. "I haven't. I have not had a need to do so before." "Well, this is one fanina of a first-time repair." Naira snorted. "It's a patch job, like sewing a patch made from a ratty jacket onto a hole in the seat of a worn pair of pants. Effective, but not pretty or a good long-term solution." "Still, this lets me drive it to the repair shop without having to give up my firstborn to cover the towing fee." Naira's eyebrows shot up, her head remaining level. "Is trading children for services a normal practice?" A laugh escaped from Leo at that. "Do I look like I'm stable enough to have any kids?" "That doesn't answer my question. It simply adds to my concerns." Leo shook his head. "No, it's just an expression." She settled back in her seat, her gaze turning back forwards. "Why?" he asked. "You got kids?" Glancing at him, her look said that was either the dumbest or the most inconsiderate question he'd ever asked another living being. Her head turned away to look out her own window. One block passed in silence, then two. Great. He'd managed to kill the conversation again. His mind was scrambling for a different conversation topic when she finally spoke up. "I had two." That single word, "had," felt like a live grenade. Much as his curiosity wanted to follow up, his sense of self-preservation told him that was unwise. For once, he listened to that warning. Several more blocks passed before he spoke again. "You in the habit of carrying spare batteries?" Naira continued to stare out the window, shoulders still tense. She answered faster this time, however. "Got them from the school. They'd been replaced, and I just hadn't found a use for them yet." Leo nodded. "You know, you said more when talking about sciencey stuff than I think you've said all day." His passenger chuckled beside him, her shoulders finally starting to relax. "I do teach it for a living. I would not be a good teacher if I wasn't passionate about it." So how does someone like you become a teacher anyway? Her next chuckle was empty of humor. They don't let Norfs become professors. So the closest I can get is a teacher's position after much hard work. Leo couldn't believe his luck for finding landmines. He wasn't trying to be rude, but if his foot wasn't on the thruster pedal, it would be tickling his stomach right now. He'd already dug the hole. No sense throwing away the shovel now. How long did that take? Several intersections whizzed by as Naira counted with her fingers. About 12 years of study and unpaid positions. Then another 6 years as a lab assistant. I was finally trusted with several classes as a full-time instructor about 3 years ago. Leo whistled. Long time. As I said, it's something I'm passionate about. At least that part Leo could understand, though he doubted he had her patience. The conversation lulled until Naira broke the silence. What about you? What made you want to become an officer of the law? Leo chuckled. It's something I knew I wanted since I was a kid. People fascinate me. I like getting to know them, getting to learn what makes them tick. And despite my grumpiness sometimes, I do like helping people. So becoming a detective felt like a natural way to scratch both of those itches. Helping people. Learning what makes them tick. Like why the kid had kept walking towards him. Why hadn't the kid just listened? Leo felt like he'd just been slammed back into his seat. His claws dug into the steering wheel, and it took a couple seconds to realize he was speeding. He felt cold, despite the heat of sun season. One voice cried out from his glove box, while another cried from his pocket. They crashed against each other like competing percussionists. Only when they became white noise did he realize there was a third voice. Naira had just asked him a question. He loosened his grip on the steering wheel until his fingers weren't cramping anymore. I'm sorry, what was that? How long? She repeated. 3 years, said the white noise. Out loud, he said. 6 years on the force, 2 years as a detective. Do you feel your job has let you help people as you hoped? He knew the answer. He could also hear Tolson's answer. Weighing the two, he picked the one Naira probably wanted to hear. Yeah, I think so. I tend to help people find closure. And who are you helping with this job? He looked over to see her studying him. You mean yesterday's murder? She nodded. And the others? He drew in a deep breath, letting it out slowly. Their families, their friends, their employees, anyone affected by their death. By bringing them closure? Yeah. By catching whoever's responsible and bringing them to justice. She continued to study him, as if she could see through him. Like she could see just how flimsy of a screen he hid behind, pretending that he was capable of helping anyone in time. What would justice be, in this case? Leo shrugged. I'm not the judge. I just catch the bad guy and take him to court. She looked unsatisfied with his answer, so he added on. Serious, probably. Multiple homicide is likely lifetime imprisonment, exile, or even capital punishment. Though I don't think they put anyone to death in a good 50 years or so. Aren't the officers encouraged to take lethal action? It seems to me that you would likely want to keep problems from cropping up again. Leo swallowed hard. No, we're encouraged to be ready to make the decision in the moment of whether lethal action is required. But lethal action has to remain a last resort. I see. The last 5 minutes of the trip passed in silence. Naira guided him to the western side of campus. A large brick building, labeled Fitzmond Building, Departments of Chemistry and Life Sciences, loomed over them as he pulled up to the sidewalk. Several college students glanced at them as they walked past, backpacks cinched up to their shoulders. From their postures and facial expressions, one would think their backpacks carried the weight of an entire seed in them. Naira gathered her things and stepped out onto the sidewalk. Leo fished around in his wallet until he found his business card. Leaning over, he held it towards her. So you can let me know what you find. The chief's pretty good about keeping me in the loop, but I'm also available if you have any questions or anything. Taking the card, she turned it over in her hands, reading front and back. Then she nodded. I shall be in contact, Detective Parsons. Cool. Sounds good, and, thanks again for helping with the car. She smiled. Perhaps it is time to bite the bullet, as they say, and get it fixed? Leo shrugged. Yeah, maybe. See you later? Naira gave a small bow. Thank you for your time. Leo still had questions, but he wasn't about to waste any more of this woman's time. Tucking them all away for later, he drove away, leaving her behind on the sidewalk. There wasn't even a gift waiting for Moira when they got back to the Dolahan estate. She and Sergei had both checked, wandering the three-story mansion for the better part of an hour, asking waitstaff and security alike. No one had been asked to set aside a gift for her. No one had been instructed to put up a banner or bake a cake. Sergei told them to start on both right away, but Moira overrode him. No, if her mother had forgotten, then Moira didn't want even a trace of a reminder available. This was a new low, and she was going to hold it in reserve to pull against her mother later. She'd give it a week, maybe 2, see if her mother bothered to remember. It'd be interesting to see how she might try to possibly make up for such an insensitive oversight. Probably the same way she tried to solve all of her relationship problems with Moira. Throw money at her and hope that came across as love. 2 years ago was the first time her mother had forgotten. It had been a time of campaigning, and her mother's dogged pursuit of landing a position among the 13. She'd gotten her wish, and apparently the cost meant little to her. That time, Sergei had bailed her out by calling her before she got home. So she'd swung by a store and bought Moira a cassette player she'd wanted. Of course, only Sergei knew she wanted it, so both of them had failed that test. At least then, she'd said something to Moira the day of. Last year, her mother had been away from home that week for business, as was always the case, but she'd called Moira that evening to wish her a happy birthday, and generously given her 15 minutes of her time to feign catching up on each other's lives. It had really been 2 minutes of talking about school, and 13 minutes of listening to how her mother's pursuits were setting up such a wonderful future for her. So the radio silence this year? Unsurprising, but still infuriating. After giving the primary staff explicit instructions to not breathe a word to her mother, and promising to never forgive Sergei if he so much as considered bailing her mother out this time, Moira locked herself in her room. She'd barely made it to the bed before the tears came. The enormous pink surface had been purchased to allow for up to half a dozen girls to sleep over, but night after night, it only held her. Leaping straight for the center, Moira balled up the covers and buried her face with a scream. It seemed months since her mother had given her so much as a smile. Ever since the other 13 had come under attack, her mother had been even more distant. Once or twice a week, their breakfasts or dinners would coincide, but her mother was constantly reading reports or talking on the phone. When she acknowledged Moira's existence, it never came with a smile. Bitter as that was, Moira didn't even want to smile anymore. She just wanted to feel like her mother wasn't dead too, or worse, that she herself had died and her mother didn't care. Moira wasn't any more of a troublemaker than her teenage peers. At least her troublemaking usually only caused grief to idiots and bigots who deserved it. She'd tried pursuing that avenue as a way of getting her mother to acknowledge her as anything more than a pit to throw money at, and it had just made the problem worse. Now, her mother just assumed she was being delinquent because she was still a kid, and she left Sergei to handle the aftermath for her. She chided Moira sometimes, and those always devolved into shouting matches. The bitter truth was, the older Moira got, the more she felt invisible and alone. She had no pull of any kind to pursue business or politics like her mother. She liked music and people, but she had no talent for playing any instruments. Her mother had paid for the best, and it hadn't helped. The one thing Moira could do was sing. But what comfort was that when you were surrounded by hundreds of paid staff, and still the loneliest person in the whole bulb? What good was singing if the real problem was that there was no one to listen? A knock sounded at the door, and for a moment Moira's heart betrayed her. Excitement swelled in her chest at the possibility of her mother waiting just outside. No, bad Moira. That was stupid. She was supposed to be mad at her mother, not ready to let her off the hook. Wiping at a few soggy patches of fur above her cheeks, Moira finger-combed her horribly disheveled hair and stumbled over to the door. Her hand shook against the lock, grief and rage both fighting for a majority vote in her emotional parliament. With a few steadying breaths, she opened the door and... it wasn't her mother. Of course it wasn't bracking her. Why would it be? It was Sergei, dressed in his immaculate suit, his clean white gloves covering hands that held a small wrapped package, and a plate with a slice of a dessert that was nearly swimming in fresh strawberries. Pardon the intrusion, Miss Moira, and I do apologize profusely if I have gotten your hopes up. As your mother is on factory tour and not returning home this evening, I thought perhaps I might take the liberty of bringing you a few things with which to celebrate your special day. Would that be all right? Moira's fangs sank into her lower lip as she fought desperately to hold back tears. If Anima had been behind the birth of her mother, then surely Seed Mother had given Sergei to be Moira's angel. Before she knew what she was doing, her arms were wrapped around his waist, her wet face wrinkling his warm, pressed dress shirt. Sergei, don't ever leave me. Her voice was fighting against her, ruining any pretense of being older than she was. I know that's unreasonable, but if I ever lost you too, no one would remember me. Oh, Miss Moira, I hardly think... He stopped, then shifted until she felt a warm, gloved hand rest on her shoulder. You have my word. The only way you shall ever be rid of me is if you dismiss me yourself. More than any gifts, any food, any attention, that reassurance was the single thing she needed today. It seemed this was to be the one source of it that she would ever have. At least one person in Moira's life cared that she existed. Seed Mother, what a dross-drenched birthday. It was another 2 hours before Naira locked up her lab for the evening. One of her students had stopped by in a panic after their reaction had nearly started a fire. An hour of working through it had uncovered a simple arithmetical error. That oversight had offset the required reactant mass by an order of magnitude. And result? A highly exothermic reaction with 10 times the amount of reactant it needed. The petri dish had melted and fused with the surface of the lab table. After that emergency had been dealt with, setting up her own experiments had gone smoothly. So now began the evening walk to the bus stop. She missed the 1600 bus and had to wait for the 1615. It wasn't an unpleasant wait, as this was a well-lit and well-kept part of Cyphus. Besides, people gave her a wide berth when they saw her there, unless they happened to recognize her. No one did tonight. The bus arrived, and her favorite spot was available. 2 stops later, a family of 3 boarded, and from the looks of them were soon to be a family of 4. A well-rounded, sneppered female awkwardly took the seat beside her. Naira remembered well the struggles of the later stages. The woman's husband took the seat beside his wife, filling the row. Their child, a young boy of maybe 5 years of age, stood in front of his mother, clutching a stuffed bird to his chest. The pregnant woman cleared her throat. Naira glanced up to find the mother looking at her. Naira offered a smile. "Any day now?" she asked. The woman knit her brows, looking down at her stomach as if just now remembering it was there. "Oh, yes. Babies do at the beginning of harvest season." She looked up again. "Listen, we've been walking all day, and my child could use a seat. Do you mind?" Naira's smile widened. "Of course not. Would you rather sit in my lap or between us?" It had been far too long since her boys had fit in her lap. She missed that stage of life. "Actually, he's been told not to trust strangers." The emphasis on strangers told Naira that the woman really had a different word in mind. "Your legs are much better developed than his, so he'd be better off with the whole seat. There's plenty of standing space along the pole overhead. Surely you don't want to stay crowded in the seat by us." Naira's smile wilted. Honestly, what had she been expecting? If Elaine had been here, he would have given up his own seat before letting Naira give up hers. But he wasn't, and while it was a stomach-bittering thing to be treated like this, the last thing Naira wanted after the last 20 hours was to cause a scene. Not when Elaine's safety depended on her ability to play this game without being caught. Forcing a nod, Naira stood up and moved to grip the closest ceiling strap. The little boy watched her go, rocking in place in front of the now empty seat as he continued to stare at her. She gave him a smile, and before she could catch herself, said, "It's okay." The boy continued to fidget with the plush bird in his hands. Then he spoke. "Mommy, why'd the doggy move?" "Because she shouldn't sit with us. You need to sit with us, okay? So sit down in the seat." He looked back to Naira. "Can I ask to pet her?" "No, honey, doggies bite," his mother said, before patting the seat beside her. "Now sit down." Naira blinked and stared out the window. Such an awful mindset to teach a child. "She has red and blue feathers like Cresty," the boy said, excitement in his voice. "Max, you need to sit still and ride quietly. It's been a long day, and we're tired from all that walking, right?" The husband finally chose this moment to chime in. "Mommy needs to rest, and we're almost home, so stay in your seat, okay?" When the family quieted, Naira risked a glance back at them. The mother had one hand against her belly, while the other gripped her son's arm as if the slightest bump would toss him out the window. Her eyes were closed, and she did look tired. The husband met Naira's gaze for a brief moment before biting his lip and staring out his own window. Then there was the child, who had turned in his seat to examine her in innocent fascination. It was far preferable to most stares she drew in public. Reaching up, Naira flicked the feather dangling from her hair braid. The boy's eyes lit up, and he held up his little stuffed bird. It had a yellow body with a spotted front, and a large blue crest of synthetic feathers fanned out comically from the back of its head. Several other passengers on the bus watched this interaction. There was even another Nolf seated awkwardly in the back corner, with their coats stuffed between them and the passenger beside them. Everyone, including her fellow Nolf, looked away whenever Naira met their eyes. Some gave her looks of pity, others disgust. What an environment for a child to grow up in. And yet, the boy remained oblivious to it, eyeing her like she was some magical creature from a storybook. His mother's eyes had held distrust. But this child... There was some distrust, yes, but there was also wonder. Naira knew which reaction she wanted to feed. Reaching up, she detached the feather from her braid. It was real, which meant it wasn't cheap, but she did have more at home. Besides, it was still cheaper than metallic jewelry. Walking quietly, she crouched down in front of the boy. With hands trained for working with volatile reactions, she added her feather to his toy's crest. His eyes went wide as he touched it, no doubt finding it to be softer than the fake feathers. He looked back at her, and she was pleased to watch wonder win out over distrust. His grin widened in pure delight. Raising her finger to her lips, Naira gave him a toothless smile and a wink. She caught the dad moving in her peripheral and glanced his way. He was also staring wide-eyed, but not for the same reason as his kid. Naira kept the finger to her lips, then made a silent chomping motion with her mouth. She probably shouldn't have, but it felt good to do so anyway. The family got off the bus long before her stop, and she resumed her seat for the rest of the journey. The bus hemorrhaged passengers with every stop after that. Slowly, the ratio shifted until the bus was carrying mostly Nolfs. As they neared 118th Street, Naira pulled the cord to request a stop. There was no bus stop here, but the driver pulled up to the public mailbox for District 11. She rode this route daily. At this point, every driver on the route knew her, and knew where she liked to be dropped off. The mailbox itself was so covered in graffiti, the little bits of original color underneath looked like dirt on a canvas. A fresh padlock was installed on the door in the back, so someone had replaced it since this morning. The door itself was so bent out of shape, you didn't need to get rid of the padlock to grab at least some of the mail inside. Naira counted as she walked. 9 homeless, no change there. 4 teenagers on Whittleton Way, and 5 on Parkton Drive. The first group was playing basketball with a trash can. The second were huddled under a flickering street lamp, their eyes betraying the prismatic glow of fractal. Of those, one was laying out on their back, reaching out towards the street lamp as if they could grab onto the light itself. 2 police cruisers parked on Sedgman Circle. There'd been a double homicide in that cul-de-sac last week, likely gang-related. The cruisers were new, and the officer's presence was as likely to deter crime as a well-lit mousetrap in the center of the room was to catch a paranoid rodent. Her hand gripped a Fyram crystal as she walked, and she jumped when her neighbor's deerhound collided with their chain-link fence. The snarling creature dripped saliva, snapping at her even as it worked to extricate its antlers from the fence. Her heartbeat recovering, Naira used her free hand to fish out a small Tarum crystal. Snapping it inside her palm, she had no prism in her system to direct the magic, but she didn't need to. The moment she laid the cracked crystal beside the fence, the deerhound began to calm. The sweet, floral scent of nature magic reached Naira's nose, and she felt the pleasant, gentle touch of its aura. Of all the elements, Tarum was by far the most inherently calming. It was a shame people thought Necrom was more effective. Necrom calmed, too, but Tarum wasn't addicting or harmful to the body. The deerhound calmed enough that Naira risked reaching up to the fence. It sniffed at her fingers, then wagged its stubbed tail. She scratched at its ears, and it once again stuck its antlers into the gaps in the fence. It stomped a front hoof and leaned into the fence, trying to extend the petting. Poor thing was kept as a guard animal and intentionally encouraged to be aggressive. It wasn't a new animal. It had lived here for several years now, and every night it still rushed the fence as if it had never met Naira before. Once, she'd assumed she could soothe it without the help of nature magic, but that had resulted in her nearly losing a finger. Deerhound teeth weren't serrated like some of Phanatom's nastier creatures, but they were still sharp and pointy, with jaw strength like a vice. Nothing else jumped out or surprised Naira before she finally arrived home. She checked the mailbox, but of course nothing was there. The mailman knew better, and would use the slot in the door. The gate for the front sidewalk was a laughable thing she could easily step over. She opened it anyway. It creaked with the same awful metal-on-metal grinding sound she'd heard when the detective's car had hit the street that afternoon. Elaine kept saying he would replace the gate with something prettier, but he had never found the time. Her heart caught, and she didn't even bother to close the gate behind her. A scent had reached her, bringing with it a memory of her sons chasing each other through the yard while her husband warmly welcomed her home. Naira sprinted for the front door. She got the first lock undone, then dropped her keys while working on the second. Her shoulder was already pressed to the door as she unlocked the third lock, the one in the actual door handle. The door swung inwards, and she almost slipped on the letter laying just inside the door. Her pouch crashed to the ground, forgotten, as she cradled the source of the scent. She left a trail of blood across the top of the envelope as she slid it open with a finger. Inside was a folded letter and a clump of russet-brown fur. Kneeling there on the floor, only partway through the wide-open front door, she reverently dumped Elaine's fur into her palm. Her body began to rock as she clutched it to her chest. A howl clawed its way out of her throat, only to be drowned in the wail of a nearby police siren.